Okie dokie. So does anyone know what this is? Or what kind of thing this is?
Yeah, that's how you would authenticate to an API, and looks like the key and the token or whatever it may be is encoded, or probably encoded in the basic auth section.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, so that's kind of what's actually happening at a more detailed level. But I'm asking, I guess I'm trying to ask about just what kind of thing is this? What kind of representation? What kind of chart?
Flow chart?
Yeah, so you could call it a flow chart. There's a specific. Has anyone ever used something like this in their jobs or seen anything like this? So this is actually called a sequence diagram. So there are we've seen a couple different, this, you could consider this part of the UML family of diagrams. So we've done some diagramming, which can be useful. So this is another kind of diagram that will usually show like interactions between clients and servers. And this is a very simple one. Usually there's lots of lines and lots of different kinds of interactions. But this is a way of summarizing how HTTP authentication works. So over here on the left, we have a client, and on the right we have a server. And if this server talked to a third server, for example, then there would be another line over here for like authentication server or something like that. And in real applications, authentication is often handled by like a third party. That's a third party server. But we're gonna do everything all on one. So the client will start. So you go from left to right and from top to bottom. So the client will start everything by initiating. He'll make a GET request to a server, and the server. This box here is just basically like explanatory notes. So the client makes a GET request to some endpoint on the server, and the server does a check and sees that the client has not provided any credentials. So then the server will, the next step down will communicate to the client, and will send the client a response, which includes this header, this www-authenticate header. And this header has a particular format, and there are different kinds of authentication. But in this example, there's something called basic authentication. And so that's included here. And then the realm is basically, again, this is just part of the format. And this name could be, this is supposed to be a human readable description of the realm or the resource that you're trying to access. Okay, so the client makes a GET request with no credentials. The server says, you can't do that, but this header tells you how to do that, basically. So this www-authenticate header tells you, hey, you need to provide basic authentication. And that's a specific kind of authentication. So then over here on the client end, if this client were a front-end application, there would be like a sign-in form, usually a form or something like that. So you fill in username and password, and then this client makes another request, this time with the authorization header. And this authorization header also has a format, which is authorization, and then this basically keyword basic, and then a space, and then the credentials in here. So we'll talk about what these credentials are in a second. And then the server will check the credentials and see if they're valid. And if they're valid, then the server will respond with a 200 response, and probably serving up whatever content the client was initially asking for. So yeah, so just the diagram works here from left to right and top to bottom. Client initiates a request. There's no credentials. The server responds with this header saying you need to use basic authentication. So then the client responds with this basic authentication in the authorization header. The server checks the credentials and then responds if they're valid with the resource. So that's the basic flow here. I'm going to go ahead and show you. I'm going to go to a web page here. One sec. Oh, let me try this again. Okay, so here's an endpoint that I'm going to use. This is a web page that's set up for this purpose as an example. So I go to this page and I can see that as soon as I go there, I get this pop-up asking me to sign in. So I can sign in with some nonsense credentials. If I click sign in, then it looks like it's just going to keep popping up until I give it the valid credentials. Wireshark student, and this is the correct credential, and then I see that I'm now allowed into the resource. So we'll look in detail what's actually happening there, but that's the basic flow. One thing to note here is that this is not secure. So what does that mean? Does that mean that there's like a virus or something on this site?
It's not using SSL, so you're using them in password were transmitted to the server in clear text.
Yeah, exactly. So this server is not using HTTPS or SSL. So that means that it's not encrypted. So anything that I'm sending, anything that the server is sending to me is unencrypted, and anything that I send to the server is also unencrypted. So if you're sending anything you wouldn't want everyone to see, then you don't want to use HTTP, just plain HTTP. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do the same thing, but let's use Postman. So Postman, so the browser is kind of hiding some details from us. We can get it some more details if we use Postman. So here we'll make a GET request to that same endpoint. And with our headers, we can take a look at our headers. So we just have kind of standard headers. No, we're not passing anything else, so there's no credentials. We're not passing any credentials here. So let's make the request. And I can see that I get this response. So it says unauthorized, blah, blah, blah. So I get some HTML telling me that I'm unauthorized. So I'm not in a browser. So this alert window that I got initially doesn't apply. So it looks a little different when you use different clients. Now let's look at the headers that the browser is sending me. Can I zoom? Yeah, cool. So which header is the browser sending me that's relevant for our purposes? So I get some HTML saying, hey, you're not allowed to see this. I also get a 401 code that's sent to me telling me that I am not authorized to access this resource.
That third www authenticate header.
Yeah. So this server is sending me, it's telling me you're not allowed to access this resource, but it's also telling me, hey, if you did want to try to access this resource, here's what you have to do. So it's telling me that I have to use basic authentication. Let's take a look at that. So this link it will be in the team exercise for today. Here's just basic docs on authentication. You can look through this just to, here's another, I just forgot the name of this.
Sequence diagram.
Thank you. Jeez. Another sequence diagram showing basically the same thing. So there are a number of different authentication schemes. This example right here is using basic. The example that we'll use, that you'll actually implement, we'll use basic and bearer. So we'll talk about that in a sec. But so basic, there's some more explanation, is very basic. Has anyone ever looked at an RFC before? I got a nod. All right. So what's an RFC, Jared?
Request for comment.
Yeah. So this is, I guess I already have a link up here. So here is basically the people who decide on all the standards for the internet. They publish these documents, papers describing how things should work on the internet. So I actually never thought I would ever have need to or have reason to look at these, but I was mistaken. So you may or may not need to look at this, but this is kind of where all of the standards on the internet come from. So if you're interested in the basic HTTP authentication scheme, this is the source that you can go to, which is not necessarily the most readable. But the summary is that you have to have, well, we'll see what the basic authentication actually looks like in a second. Okay, so it's telling me that I need to send in authentication header. So if we look at our flowchart again, where's that flowchart? Right here. So we're the client, this time using Postman. We send a GET request to that endpoint. The server sees that we have no credentials and responds with a 401 and with this www-authenticate header. So that's where we're right now. So now it's our job as the client to fulfill, to conform to this right here. And we need to send an authorization header with the basic authentication. So we can do that. So we're going to go to the same endpoint, but this time, so Postman makes this easy, but there's all these different authentication forms. So we're concerned with basic auth. You can also, again, for the team project, you'll also use bearer, but here we're using basic auth. So it'll kind of set this up for us, and I already had this in. So username and password, this is just Postman making it a little easier for you. So if I send now, you can see that I get an HTML response. So I'm now authorized to use this resource. And let's look at the headers that we sent. So we kind of use this Postman GUI, which maybe seems a little bit magical, but if we actually look at the headers, we can see that Postman took the form that we filled out and turned it into an actual header. So there's an authorization header, and we can see that the value is basic. So it's a string, right? Like everything, it's a protocol. So we just have to follow this. So it's the word basic followed by a space, followed by some stuff. Does anyone happen to know what this stuff is?
Is it base 64?
64.
Yeah. So this is base 64 encoded. So the format is, you can go here. 64. something online. You can do this in code too, obviously, but. So here's the thing, I'm decoding it, and here's what it is decoded. Might be hard to see, but it's the username colon the password. So here's a trick question. Is this encrypted?
No.
Yeah, it's not encrypted. It's just encoded. So even though at first glance this looks like gibberish, it's obviously very easy to go from this to this. So this is not secure, even though it might seem like your credentials are being hidden. They are not. So if you use this basic authentication, it's in itself, it's not secure. So you have to use HTTPS. So you have to use encryption in order for this to be a secure means of, like, granting permission for things. Okay. All right, so we're going to take one more view at the other questions so far.
When it's not encrypted that way, is there a way to get the name and the password from before you put in the GET request with the name, the username and password? Could you have gotten that from what the server was sending back to us? I saw that it was there was something in the server's response that said Wireshark student.
Yeah. Yes. So let's try setting that again. Let me take off the authentication. I'll make another request. So we look at the headers for that initial request where we're not sending credentials. We have this. So realm is actually, I guess, kind of useless. It's just a human readable string describing the resource. So here, I mean, it just so happens that this is also the username, but that wouldn't normally be the case. Any other questions? All right, let's look at one more, a little bit more in-depth example. So we'll use Wireshark for this. So what we've seen a few different tools for looking at network traffic. So you can use curl, and you can curl in verbose mode to see a lot of the back and forth. You can use TCP dump. There are other tools, Wireshark, if you're interested. It's a GUI, and you can analyze all the packets that are coming through on your network. So I will get this started. So I'm going to start a capture. I have this pre-set up a little bit. So if you want to know how to use Wireshark, this is not going to be really a tutorial. But so I'm going to start capture. And I'm going to, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go here, and you can see that I've got some packets. We'll look at those in a sec. And I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to enter a bad password. Okay, and now I'll enter a good password. All right, and I get some more packets, and I'm going to stop capturing. So now we can take a look at what we got. All right, so this will look like a whole bunch of gibberish. It should look similar to the TCP dump because it's basically the same thing. It's basically a GUI for the TCP dump. So all these are packets. So we don't, again, we really don't need to know the details, but just to show you at a lower level what's happening. So TCP protocol, this is a layer below what we care about. So we care about HTTP, but you can see that there's a lot of other things going on, setting up a connection, this exchange of information. And if this is encrypted, there's even more stuff going on. But here we care about this packet right here. So this is coming from my computer, the client, and then this IP address is the server. So this is my initial request for that web page. So it's a GET request, and I can look at the details here. So it's a GET request, and again, there's no credentials here. So the server responds initially with this 401 unauthorized. We can see that this header is included, www-authenticate, telling me the same information. I have to, this server is using basic authentication. So I go down some more. So here I make another GET request, which is not valid. And the server responds by telling me that it's not valid. It repeats this www-authenticate, telling me how I can do that. And then here's my correctly filled out form here, and you can see that this header got added. So the application took care of this, but this header got added, authorization, and then the word basic space, and then this base64 encoded combination of username, password. And then here it's, this is just Wireshark helping me out. This is the decoded representation. So username, password. That's the format. And then here it's sending me the actual resource, which is the HTML. Okay. Any questions about that? So that's the basic overview of how authentication works, the basic flow.
Chad, for our purposes, is it worth learning how Wireshark works, or was that more just for a demo?
That's more for a demo. Yeah, it depends on what you're interested in, but yeah, again, like some of the stuff I'm showing you just to give you kind of a wider context, so you don't just think these things are magic or happening in a void or something like that. But depends. I'm sure the security people, this is more relevant to them. But you never know what you're going to end up doing. So now you know that Wireshark exists. All right, so let's, I'll talk a little bit about, so here's the, again, if you choose to do this, here's the team exercise. So the way that this will work is you will have here's another sequence diagram, this time specific to the needs, specific for this application. So, your team's architect, whatever, has given you the following sequence diagram. So the client will make an initial post request. So we're going to simplify this. We're not going to send the initial bad request and then the server responds with the www-authenticate. We're just going to go, the client has to provide the credentials, right? So the client will provide the credentials. We'll go to this login route. And then if the login is valid, then you're actually going to get a token. So this token will get saved to a database, and the token will actually be used to send additional requests later on. So this is more typical of how things actually work. So your first interaction will be give me username and password. Then after that, you'll get a token that will basically represent that user or user session. And then the token will be sent on subsequent requests. So you give username and password here. If it's a valid username and password in the database, then you get sent a token, and that token also gets saved to the database. And then from there, once you're logged in, then you try to access this protected endpoint, in this case, the posts, and you send this, you send your token in the authorization header. So instead of authorization basic, which is for username and password, you'll do authorization bearer, which is for tokens. It's basically the same thing, but slightly different format. So you'll send it to posts. If the token is valid, then you'll get sent the data that you're looking for. You can read the rest of this. So here are the, yeah. So this one is meant to be a little complicated. It's hard for me to judge. You guys keep exceeding my expectations. So you guys may get this done quickly or not. I'm gonna stop recording.